Quickly going to introduce our first guest for the Born to Build series. If Willy Wonka had a factory that made solutions instead of chocolate, it might look something like the Museum of Solutions. A space where imagination runs wild, where play and purpose collide, and where children aren't just passive learners, they're problem solvers, change makers and future leaders. She comes from a family that's known for its contribution to our country, but the thing that I was remarkably impressed about, and the fact that I think all of us are very grateful for, is what she's created by herself, and that is the Museum of Solutions and then Leap Gymnastics. It gives me great pleasure and privilege to be able to welcome somebody who's turned her vision into reality by giving problem solvers an opportunity to solve problems not when they're in high school, but when they are in grade 1, 2, 3 and 4. We spoke about many of these things, and now I'm going to give it to her to start speaking and me to stop speaking. Otherwise, I'm just speaking and rambling on as always. Boys and girls, pleasure and privilege to be able to welcome Tanvi. From all the gremlins across the world, you chose this one particular one. What made you choose this particular subject, in the sense that how do you come up with the concept of Museum of Solutions?
My journey with education actually started as a teacher in 2009. I joined the Teach for India Fellowship. And while I was teaching in a low-income private school in Manipur, where a lot of the slum dwellers from Peter Mellow Road had been rehabilitated, I realized that children are just so hungry to learn, and they need to learn beyond the classroom. Where do you really take them in India to learn? And then as the years went by, I taught for multiple years, and then I had my kids of my own, and then as a parent I realized that I want to take my children places where they can learn, and where do I take them in India? And we have an neuroscience center, we have CSMBS, but that's not enough. We need something that's more interactive, that's more global, and wherever we traveled across the world, we found such places, and I was like, why doesn't India have one? And that's really how I narrowed down to kind of thinking of building a museum for children. But I always wanted it to be something with purpose. And I felt that children have so many ideas, they're so curious, they're so creative, but we don't allow that creativity and curiosity to really get blossom, right? We don't allow it to blossom. So that's really how came up with the whole concept of Museum of Solutions. And it's really a place that complements the education system. We're not trying to change the education system, but we want to give children the platform.
You spoke about something very interesting. You spoke about the fact that young people don't necessarily ever get education in school in a way. This is what I believe is not something that fosters the spirit of self-inquiry.
Yes.
And therefore we don't have too many entrepreneurs, we don't have too many scientists in our country. As much as we have 1.4 billion people, we don't have those many as in America or China does. Museum of Solutions is a way to get young people to think. And do you think somewhere what the education system is lacking is something that Museum of Solutions is providing?
Yes, so I think the education system, and no fault of theirs, but I think one of the things that they lack is being able to give children opportunities to apply what they have learned. And the Museum of Solutions is that space. It's where you apply what you learn. It's when you learn in a hands-on manner, where you are able to choose what you want to learn. Usually children are told that this is what you have to learn, this is the curriculum, you need to study this, you need to give this exam. You're not really given the choice of, okay, I want to do this and not this. So I think giving children the choice and empowering them to say that, listen, whatever choice you make will get you to your destination. I think that's what Museum of Solutions is.
You did mention that it's no fault of the education system, but the education system for so many years, it's the first education policy in 68, the next one in 86, now in 2020, all the education policies state the same thing, which is that you need 6% of your GDP allocated to education. Unfortunately, in our country, 6% has never been allocated. Of course, in the last few years, they've increased the allocation, that's remarkable. But there needs to be good schools, good teachers, and there need to be more places like Museum of Solutions. If you therefore I asked you, saying that is it okay we veer away from the script a little bit, but if you were education minister for a day, what is it that you would do differently?
I don't know, but I think the biggest problem that we have is the quality of teachers that are teaching children, and I think the curriculum that even our teachers go through needs to change, because it needs to be aligned with the NEP 2020. I think the NEP 2020 is a very good document. I think it says all the right things, but how do you actually action it? How do you actually execute it is not, it's not been told. And how do you equip people, teachers, to be able to execute it in that way? So I think the key is really being able to train the teachers to be able to really invest in getting people to understand the importance of this kind of education. So if I was education minister today, I think I really would change the way teachers are seen in our country and the amount of training that they get.
One of the things that I most admire about you is the fact that despite coming from legacy, you have shaped your own destiny.
But never mind.
But despite coming from legacy, you've shaped your own reality. You utilize these resources to create more tangible good. I've seen so many people who are who come from privilege, but don't necessarily utilize their resources as well as what society would like for societal benefits. What got you to think about the concept of giving back, and that also at such a young age?
So I think growing up, we've always traveled to all our plant locations, and I've always seen my mother. She's been very involved in constantly doing a lot of CSR work and giving back to society, long before CSR was also mandated in the country. So I think growing up, we've always been inculcated with the value system that with privilege comes responsibility, and we have to be able to really live up to that responsibility. And at a very, very young age, when I was in grade 10 or even grade 8, I really saw my passion for working with children, and I really used to get very disturbed about the fact of the inequality that children in our country have. Like, why was I being able to get this kind of education but not a child who I probably volunteered with in an organization? And I think very early on I decided that I really do want to work with kids, and I want to be able to create global standard spaces where all children are welcome and they get the same exposure. So that really was my belief. I also think I got a lot of support from my family to be able to really allow me to live up to this dream. Right? I think that's also very difficult to do. So I think I give a lot of credit to both my mom and dad to be able to allow me to choose this path. And I think we all in our ways give back to the country, because in our mind we really want India to be the best country in the world, and we want the best people to come out of India. So that really was.
That was.
Yeah.
Okay. You spoke about India being the country that we want to build, and that's something that the organization will be very focused towards, saying that let's get young people to understand India first, and then of course be good conscientious citizens. One of the things that I have noticed is that when young people try to do something, and we've organized conferences now, recently concluded one was in the European Parliament. Whether we go to the UN or the European Parliament, all of these places, there is always a certain element of looking at young people who are 16, 15, 18, saying, yes sir, aap karoge kya? And the fact that is a 17-year-old actually going to go to the United Nations, rent the UN headquarters and organize a conference where 1,000 people are there? Is a 17-year-old actually going to be able to do that? Your team at USO is also very young. Do you think somewhere in our country ageism yet exists? Did you ever face it, and what's your advice to young people who do face it?
I don't think, I'm sure ageism does exist. Did I face it? I don't really think so. Yes, sometimes people do say, oh, you're so young and you've done this. But honestly, I just think age is a number. And I really think is that if you have the passion, if you have the right belief, and you have the conviction, you can do whatever you put your mind to it. And that's something that Even my daughters tell me, they're like, one thing, mom, and my daughters are 8 and 10, they're like, we know that you're very determined because you get what you want done. But I think if you have the right belief, I really think age is just a number. And I think that there are a lot of people that will really believe in you if you believe in yourself. I think that is extremely important. In my journey, there have been times where I haven't believed in myself, where I've questioned myself, where I'm like, am I really doing the right thing? Is Muso really going to make the difference that I want it to make? But I think every time I see children in this space, or every time I speak to someone who's had a good experience, I'm like, even it's the smallest things that can make your belief become stronger. But one thing is, if you lose sight of your belief and you lose sight of your ability to dream big, then things like ageism, gender, all of those things will always pull you down. But if you're very, very clear on what you believe, then I think there is difference.
And how do you get that clarity per se? Because when you are young, there are so many distractions. And when you want to zero down, say for example in entrepreneurship, one knows that one is going to be an entrepreneur. But how does one identify the opportunity, saying that this is the opportunity that I need to maximize on?
How do you know you're going to become an entrepreneur? What is an entrepreneur?
The interest in business, say for example.
Why does it have to be only in business? Why do we box entrepreneurs just when we say they need to be business oriented or they need to make money?
Whether it be curiosity for solving problems,
Okay.
and that is one of the main reasons as why somebody would want to get into business. But how does one identify from the 100 problems that one sees around? How do you zero down on the one and say this is what I want to do?
I think you try different things. You try different things and you'll see which one you automatically connect to, which one you automatically veer towards. And then you try working in that space. I think for me, if I just woken up and said I want to start the museum without actually having real life experience, working in different organizations, working with children, being on the ground myself, I would not have the conviction and the belief that I have today. Because that's not something that you can read about. It has to come from within, it has to come from experience. So what I think is the young people is when you come up with an idea, you should always try and get some experience in that space or in that field, because that will teach you so much that you can then apply back to the work that you're doing.
And how important is formal education whilst you do that? Because these days it's fancy to be a college dropout and start a business. How important do you think is a formal education degree? How important and relevant is that in terms of your journey?
I don't think it's that important. I think it's a lot of continuous learning. I think I'm learning every single day, even today. And I think it's being able to continuously learn. So whether it's through a formal education degree, whether it's through self-learning, I think it's about constantly being open to learning about it.
But you did your university in I.I.M.U.N.
Yes.
Yes. And I'm sure you picked up many things as I.I.M.U.N. which you were using in your day-to-day life. Is there anything like that that you picked up?
So honestly, if someone asked me, did my education shape who I am today? No, it didn't. While yes, I got the exposure of living in a really big city in the US. I got the exposure of being independent in the city, and I learned a lot of life skills about how to live independently. But no, I don't think it shaped who I am today. I think what shaped who I am today is my fellowship at Teach for India, is my years of work in Parental, is the kids I have worked with. But I don't think it's so much the education that I did. However, my high school education, I moved schools. And I think the way of teaching between one school to the next was very, very different. I was a very average, shy student in the school I was in till the 9th grade. I was I was a very average, hard-working student, but very, very quiet. You wouldn't notice me. And then when I moved to a different school in a very different system, I really flourished there. It really helped me blossom because of the way the teacher would teach, the way it was more project-based learning, it was more application-based learning. For me, I flourished there, and I truly believe we all have different learning styles, and things that will work for me that will not work for you and vice versa. But I do feel my experience is that shaped me.
And not necessarily the school, not necessarily the education.
Not necessarily the formal education.
The formal education. Therefore, then I must ask you this, because it's very interesting, because a lot of schools will watch this. A lot of students, their end goal is always, I want to get into an Ivy League school. I want to study as ABC place. And then only to realize that 26% of Harvard MBAs not getting jobs at all. They take huge loans, middle income families, in order to get their children to study there. Do you think it's actually worth going overseas and spending all of that money?
I'm no one to say whether it's worth it or not, but I do think going overseas, exposing yourself to different environments teaches you a lot. Is it worth spending that kind of money? Is it worth only going to an Ivy League? I don't think so. I think the college is really just a vehicle to kind of get you closer to where you want to go. I think it's the quality of teachers, and I'm sure there are good teachers and not so good teachers even in Ivy Leagues and other colleges. So I don't think that the end goal should be I need to go to a Harvard or a Yale. I think it's about I want to go to a school which is great for the program that I'm interested in, that I want to learn. Personal opinion.
And it's the experiences that essentially would shape you much more than necessarily the, and that's what you believe.
Yeah, I totally believe it's the people that you meet, it's the the interactions that you have, and that's why I do think international exposure is great, because you meet a lot of different people from all across the world there, and you learn a lot from that experience as well.
And then the ability to get all of these people back, like my own sister, where she went abroad to study, and then she said, Rishabh, it's much better to stay overseas in comparison to coming to India. I prefer a life out there vis-a-vis a life out here. When you go abroad, then what would be the reason that would pull you back to the country? In your case, perhaps, what was it? If
I love my country, and I don't think I can live anywhere else but India. There was a brief stint where after I got married I moved to Singapore, but I just needed to be back in the chaos of what Mumbai is. But I think it's a very personal choice, right? I think for me it was very important that I wanted to come back and work for India. I wanted to give back to India. But I also had the privilege to be able to do that. Other people don't, they might want to first build their life, and they might want to live a different quality of life overseas, and then and maybe at a later age come back or not even come back. So I think.
So what would you say when?
But I do think India today is the place to be, because I think India is the land of opportunities. I think India is a place where you can start lots of different businesses and you will get the support. And there is a large population out here to be able to work with, which I think is quite difficult abroad. I also think India is a place right now where it's quite hungry for different initiatives. Like India 10 years ago and India today is very, very different. And it will be even more different. So I think India is a land of opportunities right now. So encourage people to come back to India.
Come back to it. But you said something very important. I'm glad that there are people who accept where they've come from.
Yeah.
Because I've seen so many people who come from privilege not accepting the fact that they're in a much better position in order to do the things that they're doing in comparison to the vast majority because of the resources that they have. And I'm going to stress upon that once again. There is, after high school and when you went to college, I'm sure they're going to be going to college very soon. The idea that there are very many who don't, how do I say this, don't maximize the opportunities that they have, and they get very easily swayed, whether it is nefarious substances, whether it is a very different style of life, and then there are very few who remain true to it, and then who also choose to come back and want to give back to our country. What would you say to those who say that, look, this is just another person who's preaching and telling us, saying that you must do A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z in comparison to living the good life?
I'm not preaching. I think each person can choose what they want to do. I think it's each individual journey in terms of how you see your life playing out. I don't think there's anything right or anything wrong in it. I just want to encourage people to say that India needs people who are talented, who are passionate, who are committed for India to be the best country in the world. And that's why I kind of urge all of you to come back. But it's a personal journey, and I don't think anyone should tell anyone what to do.
Sure. One of the things when growing up, I used to read in the newspaper and this was Atal Bihari Vajpayee's campaign of India Shining campaign.
Yeah.
And Atalji had this campaign that 20 years from now, India will be a developed country. This was 2002. Today we have a similar campaign saying let's make Bharat Viksit in 2047. I think the only way that Bharat can be Viksit is if all the minds who perhaps see a better quality of life abroad look to build a better quality of life for themselves in India. But like you said, it's always the choice that individuals have to make essentially, and not be forced to make those. One of the things that when it comes to choices and morality and values, and because you spoke about that, I do understand that giving the choice to other people to choose in a vast area of things such as the work, their university, etc. is necessary. But then there are certain values which are time tested, which should also be imparted. Definitions of these values are fast changing in schools today. When I do go to schools and speak at schools, for example, something as little as referring to people by their first name. Now in America and in Britain, it's very common in order to refer to the British Prime Minister as Rishi and not as Prime Minister. Whereas in India, there is an automatic reverence that you give to people who are older to you. When that reverence becomes, and I agree to the perspective, when that reverence becomes such that you can't speak up, that's a problem.
Yes.
But at the same point in time, should there not be, isn't that reverence that has been given to elders an integral part of our society?
So I think India is one of those countries that has such a rich cultural heritage. There's so many age-old practices, right? So like, I don't think one will question a lot of those practices. However, when you cross that line, when it becomes an area where it's causing you more harm, it's subduing you, it's not allowing you to speak, then I don't think it's alright. I think respect is extremely important. To respect your elders is very, very important, but not to a point where they are saying that no, listen, I'm right, you're wrong. Like that line from Matilda, right? Like I'm right, you're wrong, or I know better than you. I think that is wrong. But I think respect is extremely important. But I think what happens in a lot of the young population now is that they don't understand the reason for some of these cultural kind of nuances, and they try to rebel against it, not knowing that it's probably going to cause them more harm and it's going to be a much tougher journey to take, rather than saying, okay, let me try and fight my battles differently. There's no harm in giving people respect, and making your point. I'm not saying keep quiet, don't say things. It's important to make your point, but there's a respectful way to kind of do it. And I think trying to find that way is extremely important, because if you're constantly going to be rebelling and fighting, you're probably going to get stuck many times to try and get ahead.
But does it? Of course, it's one would say that sometimes it's the generation, but I do feel that the generation is only shaped by what they see, and therefore the discourse in civil society has become such that in order to score a point, you need to be shouting on a news show in order to be able to. So, and therefore I admire what you've done with Miso as well, where you've got people like Jane Goodall coming and talking, where you've got Neeraj Chopra coming and talking, and therefore it's quite remarkable the people who are coming and talking to a younger. The thing is, society is a reflection of what they see, and especially young impressionable minds. And to that end, don't you think somewhere it is us, the people who are, and more than us also people who are setting agenda,
Correct.
who are also setting the agenda very differently, and therefore the value systems that you want to project are not necessarily being the ones that are being projected, because they're seeing things differently. The most popular movie that's doing the rounds, which is a great movie in its own way, is a Pushpa or an Animal. These are the movies that are working today in comparison to, say, 20 years ago, movies which were very different that were working.
Correct.
So when this kind of culture is being said about, how can a 14-year-old be blamed for not calling, acting out, or an 18-year-old be told saying that now why are you acting out against your professor? Counter school of thought where young people tell me saying, Rishabh, you are part of the problem, not the solution. What is it that you? What are your thoughts on this?
No, I think I agree with you. I think even as young people, even if you're 5, 6 or 14 years old, I think you're able to very quickly understand what's going on in the world around you. I think media plays a huge role in, as you said, these young children's minds and how to kind of mold the way they think. There's certain things that are very normal now, which probably weren't normal when we were young. You can't blame children for it. You can only blame the generations above, and you can only blame the adults. Now, if a professor comes into a classroom and starts shouting and screaming, the children are also okay to shout and scream because that's the example that you're setting. And you learn from the examples that have been set in front of you. If your parents at home are constantly fighting, screaming, abusing one another, then you're going to think that's normal. So I do think it's a huge responsibility on adults to be able to set the right examples for the children. Whether it is government, whether it is media, whether it's educators or even parents at home. I think that's a huge responsibility and probably the only responsibility, right? And the biggest one.
And then, therefore, the way you solve problems, and therefore it's very interesting, the spaces that you have in music. The way you solve problems and the way you approach things is also very important.
Yes.
A debate can be a debate where it could be one versus the other, or a debate can be a debate where one understands the other's perspective before putting one's point, which is what India is, which is what Purva Paksha is.
Yeah.
So therefore, the core of Indianness is togetherness, is oneness, is Vasudeva Kutumbakam. But the idea that there is division and there are fissures in our own country, it's very clear, it's there, and therefore people are getting more and more divided. You've created a space that gets them to solve problems whilst, if I'm not wrong, also working together.
Yes.
And therefore, initiatives and concepts such as Changemakers Council, for the benefit of all who are going to watch, can you tell us how you're approaching these problems, where international problems are now being solved from an Indian lens?
So I think there are two kinds of problems that when our children come in, we ask them to kind of work on. One is we ask children to find problems that they really care about in their community, in their neighborhoods, because those are the real problems. These are problems where if we come up with a solution and actually implement it, they will see a huge benefit of it. So I'll give you an example. We just had our first group of 100 children work on our design thinking module called our Future Makers program, where a group of children, one of their parents was a Pani Puri vendor, and she was really, the problem that she wanted to solve is how do I make my father's life easier, how do I create a more efficient Pani Puri stall. And we didn't stop her, we didn't say that that's not a complex problem, that's not a global problem, but it is a problem nonetheless. And I think what we're trying to do at Muso is get children to understand how can you solve problems, what are the different steps that you need to take in order to solve a problem, who are the stakeholders that you need to talk to, who are the stakeholders you need to keep in mind while designing the solution for the same. How do you test a solution? How do you go, so they designed a prototype, they took it back to the Pani Puri wala, spoke to a few more and they got feedback, implemented it, went back. I think getting them to understand the process is really what we're more important for rather than the big solutions. Because once we kind of equip them and enable them with the process, we feel they'll be able to solve any problem.
Okay.
Because if we start doing really big global problems, then they feel, how am I going to solve it? Right? How is this my responsibility? Yes, I understand that I might have a role to play in it, but I can't single-handedly solve it. So we want to be able to give them things that they feel empowered by, they feel that they can solve, but they are learning the process on how to do it. They're building their critical thinking skills. They're building their collaboration skills. So there was a school where kids, it's a different kind of school. Like kids actually work independently on a lot of projects. So when they actually had to work together, they found it extremely difficult because they had never worked with one another. So even understanding interpersonal relationships, how do you work with other children different to you? How do you convince people of your idea? I think those are the kind of skills which Muso really wants to build.
But those are the skills that are anyways necessary in order to solve climate change. Those are the skills.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
in order to strike a trade deal,
Yeah.
you need these skills, because otherwise it's not possible in order to.
No.
And that's where somewhere I think that what you're doing with young people is remarkable. But at the same point in time, this is something that we get sometimes that I'm saying that the debates at I.I.M.U.N are of better quality than the ones, or the debates at the school are of better quality, just generally any school.
Like debates in Parliament.
In Parliament,
Of course.
And I look back and I say that yes, this is the case, but somewhere the ones who are in charge, who are in power across verticals, in different forms, across government, across political parties, etc., they're the ones who need design thinking the most. And I'm very happy that you're doing design thinking, and I'm very happy that you're doing it with principles and with kids. Is there, given where you come from, and given the fact that you've already built something like this, is there a way that we can get policy makers or we can get change makers in different walks of life to actually come to Muso and spend more time?
I would love that. We'd love to do that. We'd love to find ways to get more people to come in and actually partake in the program, even work with the children, solve a problem with the child, to really understand what the ground reality is. Because sometimes I feel a lot of these people are so far removed from what's actually happening on the ground that they're not really able to
But then
connect.
will they come? Now my question is that they come as a speaker, that's fine. They'll come here as a speaker, they'll say the same thing, saying that Rishabh, yes, we're far away from.
I think we have to find the right way to bring them to come. We have to make it, exciting for them. But I think it's the way you kind of approach them to know.
Because even on the sidelines of Davos, and when Davos takes place, so you've been, so you know this, everybody will go, but there is conversation. There's a conversation that's there. There are people who are watching it in the audience. There's no critical thinking at that juncture. There is no possibly sitting in a room and talking to people who you don't like, which is what a school child does at an I.I.M.U.N or at and that's what I'm saying. Is there any way in order to get them to do that?
I don't know, but let's try. Let's do it together. I think it would be really interesting to see. Even try and get like people to kind of do an I.I.M.U.N, do a design thinking workshop, put something together. It'd be very interesting to see how they are able to do it.
And the older ones, essentially people who are in charge, change makers.
Yeah, people who are in charge, people who are industry leaders, people who are influential in the way the country is being shaped. I think it is important for them to listen to our children. And it would be lovely to have children lead this entire session for them. Because I feel the amount you can learn from children is incredible. Even how much you can learn from a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old if you even try and listen. Because when you're born with a very, very open mind. It is everything around you that causes your mind to kind of close up. So I think it is important for us to listen to our children and to learn from them, to be open to that. I don't know how practical and possible it will be. It will be a little bit of a uphill climb, but happy to kind of
brainstorm.
Yeah.
No, because what you said is very true. When you're younger, even the duality only comes into play as you grow older. Otherwise everything is one. The problem is as you grow older, then the division starts, then the problems start. And what you said that young people should be the ones who should present solutions to the older ones. The concept of reverse mentoring.
Yes.
And because you're going to talk to principals, and I keep telling and talking about reverse mentoring. It's all good to be able to have a conversation about reverse mentoring, and the second is to actually get reverse mentored.
Yeah.
It's then you have to keep up with words such as Riz and Slay and very many more. And it's exciting and it's fun. But I don't know how many people who are, again, the reason why I ask you this is in education now. How many people who are teachers today, who would be millennials also, would be willing to sit with a Gen Alpha and tell that person saying, अच्छा तो आप मुझे समझाओ climate change क्या है according to you. Vis-a-vis ABC is what climate change is, this is what the SDGs say, this is what you can do, etc. And how would you get educators who are watching this to accept reverse mentoring?
So I'll just tell you a little bit about what we did. When we were setting up the Museum of Solutions, we actually put together a children's panel of children between the ages of 8 to 13 years of age. And we would actually put up all the mock exhibits and the programs for them, and they would give us a lot of feedback because their feedback was what shaped what Muso is today. And we are also in the process of launching our children's board, where Museum of Solutions is going to have a proper children's board where they're going to have 4 board meetings a year, and we're all going to be answerable to that board. Because we really believe that we are a space for children. We are here to get children to a level where they can come up with solutions, they can be active change makers, so we need to listen to them and we need to work with them, not make them, so I think that is what we're doing. So even with educators, I think a lot of schools now, I think it has changed. There is a shift in the way education is done in some schools, not at all. But I do feel that student councils are having a lot more voices. Educators are starting to listen to student representatives. They're starting to really understand what students want. I think we need to go a far way and do a lot more of that. But I think as educators, we need to listen to our children because they are our biggest asset. And we need to learn them.
I'm glad that you mentioned the children's board.
Yeah.
But I'm too old to plan.
Yeah. You should be under 14.
No, but
Under 16.
Well, it's great. This concept is actually great. It's something that's very implementable with what we do as well, the children's board. But the other side of it is also true, where when you give them too much of freedom, and the freedom is unchecked, at that juncture the freedom becomes such that then you need to start checking it at a point in time, like say for example in the United States, where now university campuses and universities are having to delineate what is allowed on campus and what is not allowed on campus. So what I'm trying to say is that yes, again, I'm all for empowering young people, but then the empowerment becoming such that they become the decision maker when they set their timetable becomes slightly dangerous, because then it's more physical education and less studying history. So my question is, how does an educator draw the fine line in terms of taking a class along? Because I've seen so many of them who are doing, like Kiran Sethi, she's doing remarkably well. When I was there and the group of teachers that I was talking to, and they said, Rishabh, but then they become so comfortable with us. Then they tell us saying, so let's do this and let's not do that. And then they're unwilling to listen to the other perspective because they're 14. And one can't blame a 14-year-old. And then they're head boy or head girl or the student council president who's supposed to take these decisions. So my question to you is that there are ones who are taking the lead, but then how do you maintain that fine balance that I'm your teacher, but at the same point in time I'm your friend?
I don't think you have to be their friend. I think you say that yes, I'm your teacher, but I'm also here to work with you. I'm not working against you. I'm not trying to make your life more difficult. I think if they understand that, if it becomes a collaboration, if it becomes a partnership, I think they will be more than happy to listen to you. But it has to be give and take. It can't just be that I'm constantly taking. There has to be some amount of compromise. So if a child wants to do, if you want to teach them 6 hours of history, but the child only wants to do 3 hours of history, somewhere you need to also be able to balance or this thing. Because I do think that children are also extremely practical, and they are not going to be unreasonable. They'll only be unreasonable if they're pushed to a corner. If you constantly say that no, you only have to do it my way, my way, my way, or my way, you're not going to listen to them. Then yes, of course, they're going to stop listening to you completely, because what are they getting out of it? But if it's a partnership, if it's a healthy partnership, if there's healthy dialogue between educators, people and children, I think they will see they're not unreasonable.
Correct, of course.
So I do think that if you can try and strike that balance is everything, right? We can't say that we're going to allow children not to go to schools and they're going to choose their own path. We're not saying that. Obviously, there is a certain merit in having a mentor and having educators, because we do come with certain knowledge, we have studied, our experiences have shaped us. But I do think it's important to have that knowledge.
The other thing I want to talk about, because we spoke about physical education versus history. The idea that physical education is very important, but in our countries here, 2030 we're hosting, if I'm not wrong, the Commonwealth, and then the youth 32, and before that the Youth Olympics, and then we are aiming to host the Olympics. PT Usha is a part of our advisory board, and she keeps telling me, saying, Rishabh, we need to make a fitter India and you need to run faster. But the idea that young people, of course, now, and sport has become a part of schools. But yes, we have anomalies, and of course we're increasing those anomalies, and we're having more people who are essentially winners in the Olympics. But Neeraj Chopra or Abhinav Bindra, very few when it comes to 1.4 billion. Where are we going wrong? Because, and the reason why I ask you this is because a lot of your work also is with JSW Foundation, and you do so much with sport out there. So where is India going wrong, and how can young people address this?
So, JSW Foundation does a lot of work with sports. My brother leads that initiative. I think where we're going wrong is, again, back to education. I think it's education of coaches. I think it's education of judges. It's education of parents to really understand what it takes for children to become athletes, for people to become athletes. It's about, it's not so much the infrastructure, but it's more about the coaching ability that's available there, as well as the entire competition structure that the country has. So we have a lot of talent. So if you if Youth Olympics happen for 10-year-olds, I think India will win a lot of medals. But in India, children tend to be pushed very early on, in a very young age, into one sport. They're not given the opportunity to try multiple sports. Long-term athlete development is something that India is not good at. I think a lot is changing now. A lot of corporates have gotten into sports as well now. And there is kind of a goal on how to kind of get more medals at the Olympics, because it is possible. We have the talent.
Sure.
It's really about how do you educate the coaches, the sports scientists, the nutritionists, in order to be able to build a generation that can be fitter. Right? So what PT Usha says is not wrong. As a country, we're not a very fit country. We're a very sedentary country. But that's because we don't understand why we need to be a more fit country. It's not that it's not possible.
It made complete sense what you said, but it brings to mind this question, saying that, and especially a lot of people who are here and who will see this, young urban India, people who are the upper middle class and upwards, their children are always told, saying, and I don't say this as a general statement, but I say this out of a sample pool of people whom I talk to in terms of say out of every 100 parents, 80 parents would say that, let my child pursue chess or cricket or whatever sport they want to do. But when it comes to eventually क्या करना है,
academics.
Eventually तो business ही करना है, eventually तो academics ही करना है. So eventual goal is that it's never to be the Sachin Tendulkar or the Rahul Dravid or the MS Dhonis of the world. So the idea that I'm the reason why I ask you this question is because they have the best facilities available to them. The people who study at these institutions and who come from such backgrounds, they also excel when they are at a young age. But then suddenly somewhere, once they enter university and so on and so forth, they are pulled back and they are told, saying, okay, so now you've got into Harvard or Stanford, so now it's good, you put it on your CV, but now let's focus back on things that are more important per se.
I also think it's the mindset. I think there's a huge problem with the mindset. So when I have a gymnastics academy, right, in Mumbai, so we have a lot of kids coming in. We have a group of kids that are really passionate and they want to kind of work towards the Olympics. Now they're 8, 9 years old, they have a long way to go to the Olympics. But I get told a lot that city kids will never make it to the Olympics. They just don't have the hunger. They just don't have the hunger to work that hard. And I would love to disagree with that statement. But I do think it comes back to the parents. I do think it comes back to the environment, because to make an athlete, it's one thing what the child is able to do, but there's a world around them that needs to support them.
Correct.
And to make it possible. And I do feel that in cities it does become challenging to do that, but don't think that it's not possible to do.
Because they're the best equipped to do it. Technically, they're the ones who are best equipped to do it because they have the facilities available.
They might have the facilities, but again,
Right.
they need to have the coaches. The coaches need to have the know-how in order
Right.
to do it, and they need to have an avenue to be able to get to that path. So it's getting a lot better. Things are getting a lot more streamlined. There are facilities coming up that are going to be able to do that, and hopefully 20 years from now we have a much better sporting scenario. But any sport, I think, it's a lot about dedication, commitment. It's very grueling, it's very difficult.
And that's why I completely agree where perhaps the environment that is there, that is the one that is shaping them. And therefore the city kids are not wanting to put in the extra yard because at the end of the day they'll not be when somebody
Many choices.
There's too many choices. It's
And
perfect.
also I think it's okay, you don't want to do this with it, okay, don't do it, jump. You know?
Correct.
But there's no resilience.
Hmm.
And the parents have to help build that resilience
So, but-
and the environment around it.
Sure, but when you set up an academy like Leap Gymnastics, and you set it up, right? You set it up, you said, and when we were talking, you told me about the whole thought process, like your own children. Right? Now it's very easy for your children to say that Mom, let's not do this, let's do something else. It's part of you telling them, saying, please continue and persevere. And at the same point in time, people in Leap Gymnastics who would be pushing those people to do better. So how do you build that
So like
culture?
everyone tells me, I hear it 10 times in a week, that you're crazy. Why are you making your children do so much? Like, firstly, I am not making them do anything. They want to do it. They want to do what they are doing. They really, really do enjoy it. I'm just supporting them to ensure that they're getting food on time, they're being able to go to class, they're being able to manage their studies, and I'm there for them. If I decide that, okay, because they need that support system.
Correct.
And yes, I'm working with the coaches. We're constantly developing our coaches. We're sending them abroad for training. We're getting the best from abroad to come down to India to train our coaches as well as the Indian gymnastics community. Because we truly believe that children need to be given the opportunity, they need to be given the chance. And maybe they don't make it to the Olympics, right? There's a 0.00001% that they might get there, but it's the what they learn, the education that they get while doing it is invaluable.
Of course. But tell me this, Tanvi, when you have a coach in your academy, and you've got people who are coming from, say, who are upwardly mobile, people who are coming from socio-economic stratas where they shift schools because they are, because the parent feels that the child is being pressurized in school. How does the coach, even if the coach wants to tell the parent saying, nahi, aapke bachche ko yahan rakho, how does the coach ensure that that relationship is built, given the fact that even the parents who are millennial parents and the ones who are upwardly mobile have so much of a choice and they feel the concept such as soft parenting and let the child decide, let the child do everything.
No, we're very clear with those parents. We're like, listen, when they commit to the competitive program, if they're doing competitive, could we have a recreational option as well? We're very clear that this is what the commitment is required. This is the way it's going to run. This is the attendance that's required. And you're most welcome to come in, watch your child. You cannot interfere in the coaching. Coaches can have conversations with you after. But this is not for everyone. It is grueling. It takes a lot of effort. Your child will cry. But and that's okay. And that happens all over the world. But if that's not for you and you're not okay with it, then don't do it. That's a choice that you have. Even if your child is the next PT Usha and super talented, if you don't have the grit to be able to make your child that, then don't do it. Let your child do it for fun. But once you commit, then you have to commit. And we have a lot of kids who drop out because they're not able to take that commitment. And that's okay as well because
you learn.
You learn, and that is what it is all about.
Good. Just my second last question, and then I will come to the rapid fire. Because the reason why I'm asking this is because a lot of schools find it very challenging in order to deal with the parents today, and a lot of schools will watch this. And when principals come up with the problem saying, "Look, Rishabh, it's all well and good when you say that these are things that we must instill in the next generation." But the parents are only unwilling because I remember this when I was in school. If we used to be a minute late or even a couple of minutes late, it didn't matter where you come from or who you are.
You get a minus point.
You will get a minus point. It was mandated.
Yeah.
Partially my reason to change school was essentially the fact that, look, Rishabh, you can't be given an exemption just because you are good at something or you think you are good at something. The idea that today institutions also are changing that because they have to attract the right parents, they have to get those numbers feeding in the school. So yes, there is an anomaly with the Riverside. There are a few schools across the country who are doing it, but the vast majority of the principals, and as you will meet, you would have met many, they will say, Rishabh, you are giving utopian solutions in a world which works on realism. How do you solve this conundrum?
Again, I think it's about education. I think it's about educating the parents. It's about working with the parents, talking to the parents, explaining yourself to the parents. I think it's communication and education are two very, very important things. I think a lot of, and working with parents is very difficult, right? Because parents have a lot of different expectations. But I also feel that a lot of their expectations come from places of not knowing. If someone had actually taken time out to explain to our parents why did they get that minus point, what are the values we're trying to inculcate, why is it that we are being so strict about it, our parents will make sure that we made it on time.
Yes.
Right? But I don't think they understand it. They just feel that these are random rules schools are putting up, or these are random things schools are doing. And the sad part is schools are not just randomly putting these things out of a hat. There's a reason why they do a lot of things. So a lot of times I have conversations with my children's principal, and I'm just like, why can't? Because when I sit down with him one-on-one, I'm having a conversation. I'm like, whatever you're saying sounds great.
Right.
But why can't you communicate this to the larger community, the parent body? Why can't parents know what you're thinking, what your thought process is? Because it's important, because their children spend more time in school than they do at home.
Perhaps can I answer that on behalf of the principal who might have said this, saying that, Tanvi, you listen. The others don't want to listen.
Okay, so then now that I should.
But what you said is very true, that communication has to be...
I think it should be an education, right? I think parents need to be educated because there's a lot of scary stuff also going on in the world today, right? Like you see this whole thing about the TV show Adolescence that's been going on. Like it's really created a lot of fear in a lot of people's minds, right? And parents are constantly also being exposed to this. As a parent, you're also constantly second guessing yourself, saying, am I doing the right thing? Am I pushing my child too hard? Am I doing this? So you have to understand that a lot of these parents is also a child and needs to learn. This is also a new journey for the parent. So I think how do you, and similarly for the educator as well. So I think it's a constant learning process for everyone. And we need to become a lot more accepting of the fact that we need to give each other the benefit of a doubt. We need to learn together and from each other. It might be sounding very idealistic, but that's the way I see it.
No, and we need some sort of idealism in order to make sure that we are rooted in ground as well. But because you mentioned this, you mentioned adolescence, and I've spoken about this to some of the leadership members at the organization, and that show, of course, sparked a lot of debate. It's also content that is being freely put up. You open Netflix from the days of Friends and Modern Family to the days of adolescence today and White Lotus. The kind of content consumption has changed dramatically. As somebody who is very relatable to young people, at the same point in time understands that the content that you are consuming essentially will shape who you are. How do you tell a person who's 17 or 18 who's watching Netflix and saying, or watching Hotstar and saying that, look, now White Lotus is on and this is the cool new thing that I want to watch, or adolescence is the cool new thing that I want to watch, and then subconsciously it is shaping who you become. So I'm all for Test cricket becoming T20, and I enjoy T20 matches as well. And Delhi is doing exceedingly well in the IPL. But the idea that, and one is following that, but at the same point in time, it is very important to have the same kind of values that Rahul Dravid stood for, or Abhishek Anand stood for. But the consumption of content, so then how do you, so that's my question, this is more a person. How do you tell a young person, saying, look, you consume T20 cricket, you watch adolescence, and then after that have the value system, or you have the kind of mindset that a Sudha Murthy has or a Rahul Dravid has?
we didn't have that growing up, so that a lot of our values, a lot of our experiences were shaped by what we saw, right? So we saw Friends, we saw Office, we saw Gossip Girl, and all of those different shows. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question, but I do feel that these are very real issues today. So I do feel it's about giving them spaces to speak about them, not shying away from it. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question.
Just a frank question.
Yeah.
Because I did interact with these on a daily basis, saying that look, you want to mold positively or want to give the opportunity for them to be molded in a particular manner with freedom of choice given in everything. But then where do you draw the line between, and then the other side of the argument is let's regulate OTT and let's make sure that only this much is available. But at the same point in time, as a young person, when you are getting young people to come to tuition, at that juncture, conversations around this. Do you think an educator would be open to listen to a child saying this is what I picked up in adolescence and this is what
They should. I think that's extremely important because it will be very, very eye-opening to hear what the child's perspective was when they watched it. Because when you watch it from a different perspective of what a child is thinking. There's so much, there might be so many connections a child makes, there might be so many differences a child finds. Right? The child might come around and say, listen, I couldn't even relate to this. Or a child could say, I could relate to it. I think it's extremely important and extremely healthy to have those conversations with children. It needs to be at an appropriate age, but I do feel it's extremely healthy to have avenues and spaces to have discussions about these topics, because children also need to have that voice. They need to talk about that, you're not portraying all children in this generation to be these social media mongers who are like this thing. To give us a chance to explain ourselves, that give us a chance to explain to you why we are doing what we're doing. Let us tell you where we're coming from. I don't think they're given that opportunity. And I actually would encourage schools to get their high school students to actually debrief some of these powerful shows that have these complex kind of messages and views.
But knowing, sorry, I'm going to take 5 more minutes.
It's like a book club, right?
But the book club is also something where, book club is great. There's a discussion between people.
Yeah.
But the people who are making all of the cinema, and some of them very well, I'm sure. But the few that I know of, because they come to the organization and so on and so forth, you're making content. You make content mindlessly. Because this is the algorithm that is going to work. You add violence, you add so and so, you add so and so, and then you give it. And then that is something that is working. I've had a very strong opinion about this, that content shapes the individual. And to that end,
it influences.
It influences to a large extent. Shouldn't there be more regulation then? If there is no, that's my question. If filmmakers are not taking, and if OTT platforms are not taking the responsibility of not allowing certain content, like when we wanted to go to a cinema hall and watch an adult movie, they would ask for an ID card. Today, that same content is available and there is no responsibility per se, so shouldn't OTT also be regulated according to you?
I definitely think it should be age regulated. I don't know how that's possible because everything is available open source. In terms of the way content is made, I am not an expert, so I don't know.
No, and nor am I. So I will come to the rapid fire, which is a nice way of finishing the conversation. And the rapid fire is again modeled from a popular talk show that we used to watch, Coffee with Karan. But we don't have a very big one. Medium-sized one only. But the first word that comes to your mind when I say the following: curiosity,
Children,
legacy,
responsibility,
leadership,
difficult,
education,
necessary,
sustainability,
green,
your family,
love,
problem solving,
every day,
change makers.
children,
When I say youth,
future generation?
I say holiday.
Skiing.
One book that you would recommend every young person reads.
Like reading.
This is a very honest thing to say. one show that you would recommend every young person watches then.
One show.
I'm going to stay away from commenting on it.
Yeah.
If I were to ask you, saying,
But I watched a beautiful movie the other day, Women and the Sea, about this, the first woman who crossed the English Channel. But it was a beautiful film. Must watch.
when I say India,
Go
one word.
together.
I mean, last one is the most important one. We give the hamper on the business. When I say I.I.M.U.N. or India's International Movement for United Nations, what's the first thought that comes?
I'm blown away by what you all are doing. I really didn't know, and I want to know a lot more of what you all are doing. But I would love to partner with you guys and really help you all push your agenda forward. And would love to work with you all at MUSO and host a few more conferences.
That deserves a hamper for sure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much.
It's a great conversation.
And before we let you go, there are just two things.
Sure.
One is a small video compilation of the organization. The second is a couple of questions from the students.
Sure.
If that's what it is. So we'll do the video first and then we'll do the questions. Yeah?